A good Erev Shabbos. And by the time you're hearing this, will be Motzei Shabbos. Welcome to the weekly Panorama of Halocho. Motzei Shabbos Parshas Boy. I'm dedicating this shiur for a little boy who hasn't had his bris yet. It's Ben Hatinik Ben Esther Golda Shichya to have the bris b'ito of his mana, and he should be healthy and give me a source of tremendous nachas to his parents, amongst the rest of the family. So, for a moment. So our first question today is about a Tallis-Koton worn inside out. So we know that Chabad minhag, our Tallis-Koton has got a hole, and whereas in the Tallis-Koton it's one hole, and the knot is made at the side of the garment. The first double knot at the side of the garment with a double hole, so you've got the strings go in and out, and then the first double knot is right next to the garment, away from the edge. So let's read here in the Shulchan Aruch, first of all. That's in Siman Yud Aleph Sif Lamed Hey. Yesh oyimrim. Now those who say shein lasis hat tzitzis bebeged k'moshe anu osim. We shouldn't be tying in the tzitzis as we do currently. Elo yaseh beis nekovim bebeged. They should be made with two holes. V'yatel hat tzitzis b'nekav v'echav yitzim v'dech nekav ha'beis. You put them into one hole, take out the other. Bein halachic yesh oyimrim elu. The halacha is not according to this opinion. One who wants to be machmer should do so only with Tallis-Koton. It shouldn't be so visible to others. Being extra from than more than anyone else would be considered undue pride. So then we have, that's from the Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch. Then we look in Alter Rebbe's Siddur. He brings this with Tallis-Koton. He recommends this to make two holes in the Tallis-Koton, and they should be like a kosher girdle, which means on the thumb, from the tip of the thumb to the first join, and that should be the same distance from either side. You put the four strings in one hole and put down the other, and in this way you're able to make the first knot right near the edge, right near the cloth, away from the corner. Then the Alter Rebbe adds the following: that one should be particular that the tzitzis should be on the upper side of the garment. So the upper means the outer side, when you're wearing it. It should not be on the underside, namely the inside. So they should not be worn inside out or outside in. As it says in Pasuk, or isem oisei, or zachartem v'gaimer, you shall see the tzitzis, you'll remember them. You remember all the mitzvahs, the Mount Tizkuru. If you remember years ago, the corners of the Tallis-Koton would be stitched from three sides, and you'd be able to, it was like a little pocket. You could stuff your tzitzis inside that little pocket. So the Alter Rebbe discourages that practice of tucking the tzitzis in the pocket of the Tallis-Koton. Fine. So here's the question. When the Alter Rebbe invokes a pasuk, or isem oiso zachartem l'man tizkuru, is he saying that you're not yotze the mitzvah tzitzis if it's on the underside? Or is it just recommended that it should be visible, more visible? And the question which we have on the list is, someone in the morning was a bit rush, he put on his tzitzis, put them on inside out, And later on in the day realized, oops, I've got them inside out. So he stops, takes them out and puts them on the right way up. But does he have to make a new bracha? Was he yotze the mitzvah till now? And therefore, all right, so he's making it more visible. So you could read that Alter Rebbe is saying that you're not yotze. I'm not inclined to say that. I'm more inclined to say that he's saying that it should be visible. He's trying to discourage the hiding of the tzitzis as the ones who are sticking it in the corners. But he's not saying that it's a limud from a pasuk, that it has to be at isem, therefore it has to be there on the top, not on the bottom. Let's just scroll down. Here you have from the Tehillah David. So he says, those who have the tzitzis on two holes, as we have in the Tallis-Koton, if they were done on the inside, so perhaps it would be included in where the Gemara says, Al hakonof v'lo tachas hakonof. Now, the reason why we put the tzitzis a little bit inset, about 4 centimeters inset from the edge, as you see here on the diagram, and that is because the Gemara says that it says Al hakonof v'lo tachas hakonof. The tzitzis would be mamish on the edge, it would be called tachas hakonof. Therefore, he's suggesting that if you put the tzitzis hanging on the inside, you wouldn't be yotze. But then he himself also steps back from that chiddush. It's not included in the al hakona v'lo tachas hakona. And but in other words, he's saying don't disqualify what's been done till now. And so he's also, at first he wanted to be machmir. He looks like he's not machmir either. One last comment though. He says that the harav v'siddur says you have to be about mishum v'isem oisoi. Therefore, it's not an issue for Tallis-Koton. I don't understand his statement. There are those who take the view that isem oisoi does not apply to Tallis-Koton when it's being worn under the garments. That might be. But here the Alter Rebbe clearly is talking about a Tallis-Koton. And so to say that it's not a problem with a Tallis-Koton, doesn't seem to be fitting with the Alter Rebbe at all. So bottom line is, I think that if you did wear your Tallis-Koton inside out, it is correct to take it off and put it on the right way around, but I would not say that you have to say a brocho now for the new act. Let's go on to the next question. Also, it's this question. We have a pre-BarMitzva group. I'm teaching the boys how to bind tzitzis. Now, this tzitzis which they will make for themselves, when they turn bar mitzvah, will those tzitzis be valid? Would they be allowed to make a brocho on those tzitzis? So we have two areas, which are one in Siman Yud Aleph and one in Siman Yud Dalet. Siman Yud Aleph is talking about the spinning the wool, making it into tzitzis, twisting the thread. And there is mention about a child who's making the thread and an adult is there, because the threads have to be made l'shem mitzvah tzitzis. So there is a suggestion there, an approach there, that a child who may be lacking in kavanah, but when there's an adult present, so God l'imad al gabov, then it's as if the child does it with the right kavanah. So now that's talking about making the threads from raw wool, etc. Now we're talking about putting the threads into the garment. So it starts off sif base, that a woman would be able to install the threads into making the tzitzis on the garment. However, there are those who compare tzitzis to tefillin. And just like women are not qualified to write tefillin because they don't have the mitzvah to put on tefillin, so too they would be not qualified to put in tzitzis because they don't have the mitzvah of tzitzis. According to that approach, if you say a woman could not put in tzitzis, so then a child also wouldn't be able to put in tzitzis. Even if God l'imad al gabo, even if an adult is present and telling him, make it l'shem mitzvah tzitzis. Whereas the spinning and the twisting, making the thread, that's kosher with noshim ktanim, as discussed earlier. So we have here two opinions, whether a boy under bar mitzvah binding tzitzis, are they valid or not? The first opinion says they are, and the second opinion says they're not. The halacha kisvara harishayna. Halacha is that tzitzis put in by a child are valid. However, it is advisable to take heed of the latter opinion, or the stricter opinion, although that's not the halacha. So now, coming back to our question about teaching these boys to bind tzitzis, so there is here an opportunity to teach them how to make tzitzis, to cherish the mitzvah of tzitzis by hands-on. They should wear them after bar mitzvah. That would be not advisable. We can give them another beged later. But on the other hand, that's something one has to weigh up carefully. Do we want to miss out on the opportunity of teaching them how to make tzitzis because of the chumrah, the zehirus lechatchila of the svara achrona? Maybe the importance of teaching them an appreciation of mitzvahs may be more important than the consideration of a zehirus lechatchila kesvara achrona. Let's move on. So here's another chinuch question. Apparently on some chinuch website, they came up with, for this week's Sedra, where you have the mitzvah of the calendar, so quite a cute way of teaching the children about it, to take these sandwich cookies, which you're familiar, and there's a way of twisting the one away from the other, and then you're left, one of the two sides is left with a cream. And then, as you can see, the middle bottom thing, if you scrape off half the cream, so then we know that that's the way the moon looks at the Zayin Lechodesh, or somewhere Chobeis Lechodesh. And then we have the upper, middle, or the lower right, where you have just a bit more of a sliver or a small crescent. So that's the way it looks at Gimel Lechodesh. That's how it looks at Chov Zayin Lechodesh. So you're using the scraping away the cream on the biscuit to illustrate the kiddush, the learning about the levana, which is a very interesting idea. And of course, the kid gets to eat the biscuits afterwards. So wonderful. The shaila was, is this permitted to be done on Shabbos? So let's take this away from the immediate question and just look at the dinim of writing. Now, we have writing of a Sefer Torah, Tefillah Mezuzos, Ksabtim Achas Ashir Hazos, Ksabtim Al Mezuzos Beisecha. Then we have writing of a get. It says V'chosav La Sefer K'nisas V'nosam B'yodo. And then we've got Ksiva in the Lamates Melachas. In the context of Sefer Torah Mezuzos and in the context of Gittin, there is a position that what's called chok toichos or chok tuchos is not called a ksav. So if you would have a surface and that you would carve away the immediate surface in a way that you're left with, let's say, a letter ches, a letter mem, a letter zayin. In other words, you're sculpting away the surround, and the letter remains. So that's not called ksav. That's not called writing. So it can be, let's say, in Sefer Torah, it could be that a blob of ink fell onto the parchment, and then you start scraping away, and then after you're scraping, you're left there with a letter. That would not be kosher. Sometimes also, this is a detail for sofras, sometimes when letters are touching one another. So sometimes to kosher that, it's enough to just scrape away how they've been touching. Sometimes the letters are so distorted by the touching that merely erasing a little bit of ink is not going to kosher the letter. You'd actually have to erase the letter totally and rewrite it. And that's all got to do with this concept of chok toiches. If you, by creating a letter, by removing the material around it, and therefore the letter remains. That's not valid for a get. That's not valid for Sefer Torah, Tefillah, and Mezuzah, where it says the mitzvah of Uchsavtom. Now we're talking about Shabbos. So the Lamed Tes Melachos, one of the Melachos is Kasivo, HaKosef. So does Chok Toiches count as writing or not? So I've got a sefer at home called Yesoda Yeshurim from Gedalia Felder, and he's a sefer all about Lamed Tes Melachos, like nice little Lamdish shtiklach on each melacha. And he addresses this question, and he brings from several sources that Chok Toiches does not diminish the melacha in relation to Shabbos. And he says, after all, Shabbos is learned from the Mishkan, the writing, is learned from the Mishkan, where they would have a way of each keresh, each of the boards of the Mishkan was to be aligned with its neighbor, and they wouldn't switch them around in position. It was so A, B, C, whatever, and they would on the inside of their boards of the keroshim, they made some kind of markings to be able to match up which one goes with which. So such an expression in the Gemara. So if the purpose is just to create markings, then it doesn't matter whether it's Chok Toiches or Chok Yereches, whether you created a letter by actually carving out the letter, or created a letter by removing the sides and leaving the letter. In the context of Shabbos, that makes no difference. So now let's come back to our question. Would you, if you would have some other material, could be, and you used tools to sculpt out to a design of the moon, so that would be considered kosher, from making a picture. So here is the same thing. You are creating a picture of the moon by scraping away cream, but meanwhile you've left something which you're going to say, look, this is the kosher this year. This is what the moon looks like. So you are creating a design which therefore would not be allowed to be done on Shabbos. Let's move on. So here's a question that sometimes we have at the table in shul or at home. We may have a sefer or a leaflet which has got a picture of a person. Is there an issue of having a picture of a person on the table when we are davening? So here we have from Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, Simon Sadik, Seif Chof Beis, and he talks about tapestries, Begodim Hametziyorim, illustrated fabrics, drapes, Shetoilim Bekoisli Beis HaKnesses Lenoi, which are hung on the walls of the shul to decorate the shul. That's not a problem of interrupting between yourself and the wall. There is something about that we learned from a pasuk, like here, there isn't a mile in davening without interruption between you and the wall. But this drape is not an issue. Nevertheless, in that respect, but nevertheless, one should avoid davening before this drape, this colored tapestry, because it wasn't a given that people would daven with their eyes closed. People would daven by heart, and they would look straight ahead. All right, so if you have straight ahead, you've got this tapestry. It's going to distract you. And if you do have to daven where there is a colored tapestry in front of you, you should close your eyes. He goes on to say that if you have not tapestries, but just paintings, drawings on the walls of the shul, one shouldn't use shiurim. One shouldn't create pictures on the walls of the shul on the eye level in front of people's eyes, in front of people's faces. Yes, it can be done above the height of the person, And for that reason, that we don't want to have pictures distracting the person's davening, so therefore we shouldn't have pictures in Sforim, which are used for davening. You shouldn't have an illustrated siddur, because that it shouldn't distract the kavanah. Okay, so now we've got here an issue of having a picture at eye level straight ahead of you. We've got an issue of a picture in a sefer which you're davening from. What's the story then if it's neither? It's just a sefer on the table that happens to have a picture on the front cover. So I don't think it's included in either, because it's not in straight ahead of you, and it's not in your siddur. Yeah, I think it may be an advantage, and especially if you are the type of person who will be distracted by that picture, so move it over, cover it, turn it over. But strictly speaking, min hadin, since it's not in front of you, nor is it in your sefer, it's a little bit further away from you on the table, then it seems to be, it would be allowed. But may not be recommended, but be allowed. Let's move on to the next question. That is about early talis and tefillin. And here the story is, we have a shul who start Shachris at 6:40 a.m. and arrival at the end of davening has to be by 7:30. You know, when you go on various websites to buy tickets, so you can choose what time is departure or what time is arrival. So here we have our minyan. Arrival has to be arrive at the end of davening by 7:30. Problem, which is getting less of a problem at this time, it's ready. The days are getting a bit longer. What happens if the time of Misha Yakir is, which is the recommended time for talis and tefillin, if that is let's say 6:50? So what do we do? And here are the options. Should we put on tefillin, talis and tefillin without a brocho, and then say a brocha at Yishtabach? Should we perhaps leave the putting on the tefillin, talis and tefillin until after Yishtabach? Also, having taken the times for Shema, times for Tzitzis, etc., from Chabad.org, is there an earlier time? So let's explore these details. So here we have in Shulchan Aruch, Simen Yudches. From what point can you say a bracha on the tzitzis in the morning? It has to be that you can distinguish between the white and the blue wool of the tzitzis. That is the mechaber. That says the Ramov. If you put on tzitzis from dawn, from after dawn, some say that you should make a bracha. If you're putting your talis even earlier than Misha Yaakov and Ches Lalav, and it's just after dawn, some say you should make a bracha. And that is indeed the minhag, to put on a talis with a bracha just after sun, but just after dawn. That's before Misha Yaakov. Now, just what I did see a little bit, some say that Misha Yaakov doesn't mean between the blue and the white. Just Misha Yaakov, they should see you've got tzitzis altogether. So the degree of light to differentiate between blue and white is obviously a greater amount of light than just being able to see that you got tzitzis altogether. Let's now read the Alter Rebbe, how he brings down this halach. Some say that it's from when you can recognize between the cheles and the lavon, and they base the postuk or isem oisai. It has to be from a time that you can see and recognize the cheles. Only then is the chiyuv. And that's the position of the Shulchan Aruch, or the Mechaber. But yesh oimrim, there are those who say Shasri nikra me al mishyal amud hashachar. that Shas is already from dawn. It's already a little bit of light, enough to be able to see the Tzitzis, even though it's not light enough to see the difference between the Tcheles and the Lovim. So according to this more lenient opinion, so once you can see that you have Tzitzis, then you're ready, and that's in other words, just after dawn, you can already make a brocho. V'chein noihagin. And so he quotes the Magen Avraham more, that indeed the minig is to put on tzitzis earlier than this Misha Yakir time. We call tov lechatchila, shelo yilbesh es hatalis bebrocha at sheyakir ben tcheles shebo lelovel shebo. It's recommended not to put on the talis with a brocha until such time, until the later time. So, although the Ramah says again to be makel to put on the talis, the tzitzis, the talis earlier from Alos HaShachar, but the recommendation is to wait. Now, let's read the words carefully. Is it the recommendation to wait with the brocha or wait with the wearing? So let's read this carefully. So again, the way the Ramah presented it is the minig is to put on the tzitzis earlier and to say brocha. Now the Alter Rebbe is saying not to put on the tzitzis with a brocha, which means basically not to put on the tzitzis until, otherwise you could have said shaloi levorech alal tzitzis. He said no, lo lilbish asatalas b'brocha. So therefore, it seems to be the recommendation to not put on the talis at Alos HaShachar until after Yishtabach, and then once you can, at that point, since you can put it on with the brocha, so you should put it on and until then not wear the talis at all. That seems to be the Alter Rebbe's advice. What should you do for the people in your shul? This is you have to measure. There are if necessary, one can rely on the Ramah. Yeah. Now, what about tefillin? Now, the man for tefillin, the earliest for tefillin, is Mishiyakis Chaveirei Barochik Dal Damas. If you can recognize someone from a distance of Dal Damas, someone who you know a little bit, so somewhat familiar. Some say that this man of recognizing your friend from 4 amas away is identical or almost identical to the time when you can see the difference between the white and the blue wool. And therefore, by tefillin, I didn't see any other opinion. So even if there is an opinion here, I can put on the tzitzis already right after dawn. But with tefillin, it seems to be a bit stricter, that you'd have to wait till Mishiyakir. So you may as well wait till after Yishtab. 2 more points about this. When is this level of Mishiyakir? So looking at the Piskei Teshuvos, as in Chabad.org, I see that they're saying that Mishiyakir is 45 minutes before sunrise, and that 45 minutes in Eretz Yisrael at the Yomim HaShovim around the equinox will equal something about 10-point-something degrees. So again, the Zman for Mishiyakir in Chabad.org is when the sun is about 10.5 degrees beneath the horizon. In Piskei Teshuvos, he brings, also in Siman Yud Ches, he brings lots of different opinions. Some say that Mishiyakir is an hour before sunrise. Some say 52 minutes before sunrise, etc. There are stricter opinions, but there are certainly more lenient opinions. And therefore, to go a few minutes before there's Mishiyakir time written on Chabad.org, one can be lenient in going to an earlier time. I'm sure there are other websites which have earlier Mishiyakirs, and I think we can go according to that opinion. One of those are earlier opinions. One last thing is that here's an interesting story in Igros Moshe. Moshe Feinstein was asked about a worker who has to leave the house at 5 a.m. and is going to be busy at work a whole day. He would not have a chance to put on tefillin later. The worker is asking, can he put on tefillin at home before, when it's like 4 o'clock in the morning before he goes out to work? And Reb Moshe says the reason why we're not meant to wear tefillin at night is because you might come to fall asleep in them, and therefore once you're falling asleep you don't have control of the functions of your body, etc. But this man, says Reb Moshe, he's gotten up now, his tak is still middle of the night, but he's gotten up to go out to work. He's not going to go to sleep. So therefore, under the circumstances, it's permitted for him to put on tefillin. Then says Reb Moshe, however, if he is a Talmid Chacham, he should put on the tefillin without a brocho, because in the night, in Midrabanan, one shouldn't be wearing tefillin. If he is not a Talmid Chacham, then he should say a brocho. And he explains himself. If he's a Talmid Chacham, he will be aware that the intricacies, and that's why he's not saying a brocho. If he's not a Talmid Chacham, you tell him, put on tefillin without a brocho. So you say, even the rabbi is not so sure that I should be wearing tefillin. So they say, I'll manage without. So because of that concern, Reb Moshe says, if he's not a Talmid Chacham, tell him to put on with a brocho. And I'm coming back to our topic here. With the balabatim in your shul, those people who are coming to make up your minyan, etc., how will they handle not putting on a talis early, or putting on without a brocho? I'm not sure how your people will handle it. So just tread carefully. Let's move on. Someone's asking, what's this? Is there a minhag of saying L'she'oschok visi Hashem after a sneeze? So I remembered something for years ago, and I managed to find it. And there's a journal called Panorama of Halocho, published by the Beis HaMedrash of Rav Orlando in Bnei Brak. And they had published a manuscript of the Marshal of Shlomo Luria from 500 years ago, 450 years ago, whatever. And he writes about a person who sneezes. The others would say, Baruch Tia, bless you. Or some would say Asusa, which means healing in Aramaic. And then they will say this to him, and then he will say, L'she'oschok visi Hashem. To your salvation I have hoped for, anticipated, Hashem. In Mishnah Berurah, this is in Siman Reish Lamed, is it Reish Lamed Base somewhere? It's Reish Lamed, talking about healing, and he writes, Misim Misha'atesh, one who sneezes, and Chaveiro Eimele Asusa, and his colleague says, should be a healing. You should say to you should say Baruch Tia. So the one receiving the good wishes should say, blessed you be. You should also be blessed. And then Hashem. I look forward to your salvation, Hashem. What's the reason for all of this performance around the sneeze? The Omru Rabbi Seinas because our sages tell us that originally there was no such thing as people becoming ill. A sneeze, he would be walking the streets and sneeze, and he would die immediately. Until Yaakov Avinu, or Vikesh Rachamim Aladov. And then Yaakov Avinu pleaded with Hashem that there shouldn't be this suddenness of a sneeze and dead. And that's why we have a certain thankfulness that we sneezed and we can continue living. And so that's this the L'she'oschok visi Hashem, saying to Hashem, I look forward to your salvation. I did not manage to look up today. I remember a beautiful sikha on the words ki v'makli, where Yaakov Avinu crosses the Yarden, and he says ki v'makli. Only with my staff did I cross this Yarden, and the word ki v'makli have got the same letters as Maccabi, which stands for Micha Mocha Bo'elam Hashem, and it also has the Rosh Hashanah of Kuf or Lamed Kuf Yud or L'she'oschok visi Hashem. So Ki v'makli, Maccabi, and L'she'oschok visi Hashem. So whilst we're going to fight, we invoke Hashem's salvation. Let's move on. So here's a question. There is an idea advocated in sages, to have a mokem kavua litfilos, to have a set place for davening. So what's the story if there's a mitzvah in another shul, etc.? Are you missing out on this? That seems to be the question. So now let's read inside. Yikba mokem, this is of Simon Sadik, is it, I believe? Where is it? Simon, right? Yes, it's Simon Sadik. Yikba mokem litfilosoi, one should designate a set place for prayer. Shalei shanehu, you shouldn't change this. Im loy l'tzerach gadol, unless there's a great need. And it says further, a person who designates a place for his davening, Elikei Avraham be'ezrei Hashem, the God of Avraham, will assist him. And we see that Avraham designated a place for davening. It says, "Vayashkim Avraham ba'boker el hamokem asher amad sham." He went to the place where he had davened in the past. He goes to more detail, not only to have a set shul where you daven, but even in the shul, which you have your regular shul, you should have your set place where you daven. Within Dal Damas of that set place is all considered like one place, because you don't have to dafka mamish be in the same inches. Also, when you're davening at home, you should also have a space, designate a space where you would not be disrupted by other domestic activities. So that's the Alter Rebbe in Shulchan Aruch. And what is noteworthy, he says, if there is tzorach gadol, so there's a bar-mitzvah in another shul. Is it a tzorach? Actually, because I'm one of those people who work on Shabbos mornings, so I don't even have this challenge about going to bar-mitzvahs in other shuls. But is it tzorach gadol? Because, and my own feeling about this is that when you come to a new place, there's lots of distractions. Once you've used the same place several times, so those distractions are not so interesting, not so distracting. So having a mokem kavua where you daven every day, and so then you won't be distracted because it's there's novelty out there. Now, I remember last year I didn't find the sikha yet, but I remember last year we learned a sikha from, I think, Tafshin Lamed Hey, and the Rebbe was talking about in the house, even in the house, to have a set place for davening and a separate place, in the house to have a set place for learning and a separate place for davening in the house. I found that very interesting, and it could be your place for learning maybe actually be distracted to your davening because you want to look up this, want to look up that. So to have a set place for davening where you would not be distracted. In the Piskei Teshuvos, we have here a bit more detail. It's okay to have, let's say, a set place for Shabbos and a set place for weekdays. It could be a set place for Shacharis and you have a different place where you daven mincha. That's also okay. And if the svara is that you shouldn't be distracted by the novelty of the new location, all right. So if you have your set place where you daven week in, week out, so then that's also counted as a mokem kavua. One last thing about this. There's a beautiful vort of the Arizal brought in the Anaf Yosef or Eitz Yosef on the Gemara, which talks about one who prays in the mokem kavua litfilosoi Elikei Avraham be'ezrei, has a special help from heaven. So he says the following: what's so significant of having a set place? Hashem is all over. Why can't I go anywhere? So he says like this: unfortunately, now Eden are considered like a nido, as it says in Pasuk in Eichel, Kein hoisa lenido hoyosa. A nido, as we know the halacha, would not be allowed to sit on the same bench with her husband if it's not a fixed bench. But if the bench is fixed, then the husband and wife would be allowed to share a bench. Well, so then we want to have the hashruas hashchina when we daven. So by having a mokem kavua for davening, then it's conducive that the shechina would be able to be with us on the same bench, so to speak. So this is a what he says in the names of the Arizal, a deeper pirish of having a mocking kavua litfilosoi, then Hashem will be come to your assistance. But I do the poshta pshat, I think is as I mentioned before, by having a set mokum, you are controlling that you shouldn't be distracted unduly. Question number 8. So here we have someone whose father passed away last year, actually, and he's buried in Eretz Yisrael. He's going to Eretz Yisrael for the yahrzeit, and it's got a busy day. What's the issue about perhaps going to visit the grave at night, and then he'll be his day will be more flexible. So here we have from the Nitei Gavriel, volume Avelus, volume 2. You can see it's pay base. That there are those who are particular not to go at night before Chatzos to Kavarim, and he says that the Olam are lenient about this. Now let's read. What's the business about not going at night? So he says that there is something about by night, al pi Kabbalah, that we don't indulge in reading Mikra. And what do one goes to a cave? One says chapters of Tilim. Now that's something which, after nightfall, before Chatzos, is something we should avoid. So that's one of the reasons which he gives over here. Now, and then the Nitei Gavriel says that Olam noyagim leilech. That the broader custom is that people do go to visit graves even after nightfall. Now, this is from the Sefer HaMinhagim, where he talks about chitas. It's known that by night, from Tzeitzis Kechavim until after midnight, we don't say Tilim, including the Tilim of the shiur of the month. On Chumash and Tanya is okay. The Chumash is because you're learning it with Rashi, it's therefore it's Teisha Balpeh. Tanya is also what's called a Chumash. Let's say how you say Teisha B'Chsav of Chassidus, but it's Teisha Balpeh. And therefore, what I'm seeing here is that we are quite particular of Mikra Balayla. So unless there's no option, but if there is an option to go to Beis Elam's by night or by day, it seems to be that the recommendation should be that it should dafka be by day, avoiding this question of saying Mikra Balayla. So here's a question that someone sent to me about eating quail's eggs. Become apparently quite popular, fancy ados to have quail's eggs. And do we have a proper tradition that this is the quail and therefore it's kosher? Now, there are various simonim to recognize that a bird is a kosher bird. And so the Shulchan Aruch, Simon Pei Beis, says that if you have those simonim, you can rely on that the bird is kosher. Then in the Rashi writing, the Ramah says we shouldn't rely on those simonim, and we shouldn't eat any poultry unless we have a mesoros, unless we have a tradition, unless we have a tradition passed from generation to generation that this particular bird is a kosher species. That is indeed the custom that we only will eat a kosher bird we only consider a bird to be kosher based upon a tradition. Okay. So now, my impression is that quails were not terribly common in Eastern Europe, so we don't necessarily have a Mesorah. What about, though, can we rely on the Mesorah of another part of the world? And there are other parts of the world where they claim to have a Mesorah from a Yidden. They have a Mesorah. Can we rely on that? And my impression is, looking at the Darkei Tshuva, which is an encyclopedia on the Shulchan Aruch here in Simon Pei Beis, he takes the view that you can rely on the Masorah of another community. So if it's going to be the Yemeni or the Sephardi or the Turkish, whatever, if there is an authentic or a tradition that they, from a Yidden, that they were eating this bird as a quail, as being a kosher species, so then we would be allowed to rely on the Masorah of another community. That seems to be the majority consensus. So, yeah. The next question which we have on the list is that these days with so much vegan stuff around, is there a Marasine issue with something that looks like a cheeseburger? So I'm going to not answer that question because I don't have my forum accessible. It's a relatively modern question. I guess if it would be the worry that what they're saying is that you're seeing this cheeseburger, but the meat in the cheeseburger is very likely that it is a vegetarian meat. Do you have to worry about marasai? Good question, and that's only going to become more and more as the way things are developing. Yeah. The last question which we have is about the brocho for barley that is cooked and served as a kosher. So, sorry, I don't have it on the screen, but we're looking at Eric Aleph of Bechastanenin and various places in Piskei Teshuvos that whole grain, whole wheat or whole barley, the brocho is ha'adama. But if the grain has become mushed, certainly if it's gotten stuck with one another, but if it's become quite mushy, then it's already becomes mezainis. So if you'd have a barley kasha where the grains of barley are stuck somewhat to one another because of the cooking, that would reduce them. That actually would be upgraded. It would be, instead of being ha'adama, it would be already mezainis. I also saw in Piskei Teshuvos, he says that pearl barley is processed and therefore it would also be mezainis. I think we may have discussed this in the past. What's the story about a cholent which has barley in it? It seems to be far-fetched that a sprinkling of a few barley grains, even if they were going to be mezainis, should make the whole cholent into mezainis. It's very strange. He comes up with some quote of an idea that if inevitably every spoonful will be a few grains of barley, then that's considered quite a strong presence to be able to make mezainis on the whole mixture. I didn't have a chance to look at it more carefully. I'm not so convinced. So let's leave that for the moment, for another time. Meanwhile, I wish you, for me, a good Shabbos, for you a good Tavoch, and an inspiring Yud Shvat, and peace all of us in our Hiskashas, Bilona Dechaya, and we should be zecher to go out. The goal is Mashiach Tzidkeinu, Meher Rabbeinu Mamash.